Even if you haven't seen Blue Lock, you're likely aware of the whole meme about, oh yeah, this guy has two loving parents by the way, and still acts like this. Which comes from how, in comparison to all the other characters, struggling through a whole spectrum of personal issues from injury scares to loneliness, all the way up to outright horrific childhoods, Isagi has none of these issues. No deep backstory or heartbreaking struggles. The big traumatic moment that his story sometimes goes back to is him losing a school football match 2-0 to a team with a player known as the Jewel of Japan, before going home to both his mum's home-cooked food and an "oh well, you'll get them next time son" from his father. Meanwhile, possibly on the exact same day, his rival Kaiser would have been brutally beaten by his father if he didn't manage to steal enough food for the man who called him every insult under the sun. You see the difference here, right? And so I know the fanbase is slightly divided on this, although I don't know if I can say divided, because it's really not an even split. The majority of Blue Lock fans love him, right? I've seen a lot of outright obsession with him. He's easily the most popular character in the series, and obviously I myself have made a ton of videos on why I find him inspiring, etc. Whilst he doesn't have some sort of traumatic backstory, just about everyone can emphasize with that strong desire to win. Especially after I picked up a sport myself about a year and a half ago, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But Isagi has this essentially perfect or near to it mindset when it comes to improving yourself and so forth, which I've made a 50-minute video on, but it's very easy to aspire to him in that regard. And also because a lot of his development is mental, with the physical stuff being mostly in the background, everyone can see themselves growing the way he does, whether they play a sport or not. We can't all picture ourselves sprinting past half a team or pulling off ridiculous volleys, but we can all picture ourselves having a sharper mind with a more resourceful mindset. And this, along with his whole underdogs rising through the ranks angle, makes Isagi extremely easy to be inspired by. But I think unless you're maybe a very intense athlete, there's not a ton to resonate with him as a character outside of wanting to win. You know, the only struggle we ever see him go through is getting better at football, which is fine, obviously, right? This is a sports manga, but regardless, because of this, there is also a chunk of the fanbase that see him as kind of boring in comparison to the side cast. Blue Lock has one of the best lineups of side characters I've ever seen in a series, many of which have incredible dynamics between them, to the point where the series can just put basically any two of them either up against each other or alongside each other and have a super interesting scene naturally bloom from that. And it all works so well that a lot of us, myself included, wish we got to see more of that. And slight side rant here, obviously this can be a very difficult balance for a series to strike. You know, one that will never be perfect for all of its viewers. You know, sometimes people are so attached to the main character that spending too long on the side cast that we have much less investment in can be quite unengaging for them. And one of my favorite series of all time, Kaiji, has almost no reoccurring characters or characters that stick around for very long at all, and it pulls it off really well. So it definitely can work, and obviously Solo Leveling, regardless of what you think of it, has done pretty well for itself despite none of the side characters being at all interesting or ever really doing much. Honestly, I don't remember any of their names. But Solo Leveling aside, I think in Kaiji's case, this is mostly because the side characters don't really have any sort of super interesting backstories or dynamics going on. This series is very focused on the present and attention in that moment. It doesn't really feel as though there's any potential being missed by not exploring these characters more. They show up to face off against Kaiji, and that's the end of their role in the story. However, by comparison, sometimes it's incredibly frustrating in other series to see that potential not being used, especially when some of the coolest or most interesting characters just don't end up doing a lot. Still waiting on another Rock Lee scene, by the way. I know that a criticism some people had of the NEL was the lack of that, that it was all very Isagi centered. There wasn't too much besides maybe the Nagi and Ryo thing that didn't involve Isagi, and even that did quite a lot of the time. With so many incredible, larger-than-life characters, yet only so much screen time to go around, some of them inevitably had to take a backseat, especially in the PXG game, where we had a lot on the field at once. And I promise I'll come to Isagi and how this all links to him in a minute, but I know this is something that has been quite fiercely debated around the community. What was the solution, if it even needed one, to this? This match was obviously incredibly long. It took a year to release and drew a lot of complaints for the community for doing so. So it's not like he could have added much more in with scenes from other characters. Perhaps some of the scenes with Isagi in could have had someone else there instead. For instance, we're all aware of how defenders in Blue Lock seem to do less defending than the strikers, so maybe there was an opportunity there. But either way, there would still be characters who felt undeveloped or underutilized. You know, it's just the way it is. Not everyone can get a goal, flashback, huge moment, and every time they do, it's time away from the more central cast. Something had to be sacrificed either way, and the author, of course, opted for a lot more time on Isagi. And there is, of course, a very good reason for that, beyond just, oh, he's the MC. But just quickly for 20 seconds, I probably won't be posting a ton more Blue Lock videos for a while. You know, I just feel like I've got more interest in other series at the moment, especially with a lot of new seasons coming out. But I have been doing weekly Blue Lock chapter reads on my Patreon. You might remember I tried to do that on YouTube for a little bit, but copyright got me very quickly. Patreon is far more chill about that, so go check out the link below if you're interested. But going back to Isagi and the benefit of giving him this kind of blank slate, normal life, is that it allows him to be used as this kind of anchor for Blue Lock's philosophy. You know, a lot of the themes and ideas originate within Isagi, or Jinpachi of course, but even then, usually the first time we see it applied is through Isagi. And because there's not really anything else going on with him, besides being number one, there's no noise. He can be this very central viewpoint for all the ideas being put forward. Isagi is this kind of vehicle that puts Blue Lock's philosophy in front of us, with it all being purely focused on becoming the world's best striker. And then all the other characters are the kind of questions, the what-ifs, the exceptions. You know, what if you take these ideas too far? What if your body's on a time limit? What if you simply don't have what it takes to be the best in the world? Is this really the best way for everyone? What if you stop getting excited by it? Is there a point where you should stop following these ideas? And much like he does with their playstyles, Isagi then learns from these questions. He picks up the little details from them that apply to him. And I think a huge part of what makes Blue Lock so interesting, and a series that people can dive so deeply into, is that whilst we of course have this incredible sidecast, for each and every one of them, we can see how they compare to this constant element in Isagi. You know, in almost every single video I've made, I end up comparing them to Isagi somehow and speculate on whether or not what he's doing would work for the other character or not. And if you're like me, maybe you like to think about how that applies for yourself as well. The series kind of needs Isagi's normality to function. If you swap Isagi for someone like Chigiri as the lead, the story fundamentally changes from a constant push revolution into a story about overcoming injury-related fear, which would be cool, but it wouldn't be the Blue Lock we know. I know everyone likes it for different reasons, but for me personally, and honestly I think a lot of people, the psychological breakdowns are really what makes the series so great. And while some of us might relate to some of the other characters for various reasons, we can all relate to Isagi's fight to improve at something, and we can all apply so much of what he does. And again, if you're interested, I've got a 50-minute video on exactly that.